So I just bought my second pair of barefoot shoes, and in today's video I want to talk about the journey that I went through with my first pair, which I've worn for about 1.5 years. But I must say, the road with these shoes was not always as smooth as I was expecting. So let's find out why. Before we dive into my experience with barefoot shoes, I briefly want to go over to what barefoot shoes or minimalistic shoes really are. Now, if you talk about barefoot shoes, people always think about these 5-finger Abrams or whatever the name is, but that doesn't have to be the type of shoe that you wear. This could be these nice looking Vivo Barefoot shoes. Basically, these shoes have two main characteristics. The first one is that they have a very narrow sole, so that the feeling with the ground resembles walking barefoot, so your feet can actually move as freely on the floor as they would barefoot. That means that the sole doesn't really have a cushioning purpose, but more like a protective purpose, like against sharp objects. Now, the second characteristic is the wide toe box. So that means that your feet, and especially your big toe, have more place to spread out, which is actually going to mimic barefoot walking as well. What is the reason that I wanted to get into barefoot shoes? As with everything, and that is why I also tried floor sleeping, I wanted to go back to how our bodies were designed to be. And if you look from an evolutionary standpoint, our feet never had those fancy cushioning soles. We've always walked as much barefoot as possible, and that is also how the musculature of our feet are adapted. So by using these shoes with big cushions, although they feel super comfy, they are really taking away the purpose of the muscles in your feet, because we are here for the long run. We want longevity. If we're training, we want to do it somewhat functional. So that's why I thought, hey, why not make sure that my feet and my ankles are as best equipped for longevity as possible. And that's why I tried looking into barefoot shoes. And now that I have a 1-year-old son, if we look at that ancestral foot that he's portraying, you see that actually the end of the toes are the widest of his feet. And most shoes don't really show that. Most shoes have the widest part, the part where your toes start. If you look at baby feet, the widest part of their foot is actually where the toes end. Now, if you put them in shoes, and we've all been there, if you put them in shoes where the toe box or the end of the shoe narrows, you're really compressing that big toe inwards, making sure that the muscles of your foot are going to be compromised. By opening up that toe box, by getting a wider toe box, you really free up your toes and you can really start using the musculature of your foot better. Now, that being said, don't expect, if you have flat feet or if you have problems with your foot, that if you dive into barefoot shoes, that all your problems are going to be resolved. And that's something I learned the hard way, because when I transitioned into barefoot shoes and I bought these Vivo Barefoot shoes, I think it's the Geo, I will put the link in the description and maybe here on top, but these shoes actually felt nice because you really have that wide toe box, but once you wear them for quite a long time, your feet are getting sore and tired as hell, because we are not used to this. If you come from a very cushioned sole, and this is not even the biggest cushion you can find, what you're doing with this shoe is you're heel striking a lot. So your way of walking is so much more different than we were intended to walk. So here you really heel strike, and if you're like me, I like to walk really fast, you're going to strike a lot harder with this shoe. As opposed to if you take a barefoot shoe, all this heel striking, you feel that immediately into your heel, and that is going to get sore very quickly. It's also going to hurt very quickly. So you have to go to more of a roll over your foot type of walking, which is very different. So that's really one of the things that I had to adapt to. And even 1.5 years later, I'm still sometimes feeling pain in my heel for walking on my barefoot shoes. That just means that you have to be more mindful when you're walking And also when you take these shoes off, that you really make sure that you use a hard ball to just go and drive into that heel to loosen up those muscles again. Another thing that I found, and especially with these type of shoes, because they're all black and they're leather, they don't look as sporty. They felt great and I really wanted these type of shoes. But if I look down, I really felt like I was wearing clown shoes. Like they were big, they were like weird looking, and I really felt uncomfortable looking downwards to my shoes. Now, fortunately, if you look into a mirror, that gives a completely different view. So people never really noticed, or I never got people talking to me about them, but nonetheless, I kept wearing them. Being able to go barefoot and experience using these shoes was actually a good thing to do. Once you get used to these shoes, the biggest downside is going back to regular shoes, because regular shoes are always going to feel too narrow. That's really how I grew out of my Skinners. You remember that video where I said these socks were just amazing for in the gym? Well, at a certain point, my toe box became too wide, and actually these socks became too narrow for me. Once you go barefoot, it's difficult to transition into, but it's also difficult to transition out of. And that's a good thing. You want your feet to be as wide as possible, to be as strong as possible. So that's very nice. Now, one thing that I also found, and especially passing through 2 winters with these shoes, is that your feet are not getting cold. Like you would think that a thin sole like this would make your feet just absolutely cold. Now that's not the case, and the reason for that, I think, is that you have more wiggle room for your toes. You can use those muscles around your foot a lot more actively. So I think that is going to increase blood flow, especially if you're walking and if you're moving a lot. I said that the transitioning into barefoot shoes is a bit difficult, so that's why I really recommend you don't push it. Maybe you're fine and you just go with it, but for me personally, I had to. If I knew that I was standing, especially in the beginning, I was standing for long periods of time, I really went back to my Nikes in order to have that cushioning of my heel, because standing on barefoot shoes for a complete day is just very, very difficult. Take your time to transition into it. If you're like in your 20s or in your 30s, remember, it took you 20 to 30 years for your feet to become accustomed to those old shoes that you wore. So going to barefoot, expect this to take some time for your feet to adapt. So thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you liked this video. I hope you got something out of it. Let me know in the comments down below if you ever had barefoot shoes, or if you are going to transition into barefoot shoes. If you have some concerns about going barefoot or going into barefoot shoes, let me know in the comments down below and we can discuss together. So I guess I'll be seeing you all in the next video. Peace!